Hey, yesterday I was interviewed by Jen Helfeld on his channel about anarchy. I would just like to express some thoughts to it. It was, I think it was nice, that he gave me the floor and allowed me to be interviewed, but there were many disappointing things with the interview. One, it wasn't really an interview, because an interview is you ask questions and you let the other guy talk. And he didn't really let me talk. It was him lecturing me, telling me what, not even why anarchy is terrible, but all these abstract scenarios and lifeboat situations and stuff like that. And he didn't really allow me to speak. If I didn't interrupt him, I probably would have spoke about as much as Ron Paul spoke during the Republican debates. So only because I was constantly able to interrupt him was I able to get a word in edgewise. But one of the things that I found very interesting is that if you watch Jan Helfeld interviewing people who are more statist than himself, he does not use arguments based on fear. He does not use demagoguery. He makes arguments according to first principles. If government does not have the right to do this, can other people delegate their right? He argues according to first principles, but whenever he debates with people who are less statist than himself, he does not argue from first principles. Not one point in the hour-and-a-half debate did he basically justify why the government is a necessary or moral institution and why anarchy is incompatible. All he did was arguments based on fear. And any idiot can make fear-based arguments. I mean, we hear this all the time. If you say, I'm against the welfare state, you will hear fear-based arguments. Well, if you don't have the welfare state, then old people are going to be eating cat food, and people are going to be starving to death, and there's going to be all this crime because people are robbing because they don't have enough food to eat from the government. So unless we redistribute your wealth, all these bad things are going to happen. Anyone can say, boo, boo, and those are not arguments. Those are not arguments. Anyone can try to scare you and paint horror stories, and all of the things that Jen Helfeld was saying, well, what if one agency attacks another agency? Well, what if one government attacks another government? And his response is, well, no one's attacking America. Okay, but how about all the other countries that are America? And his response was, fuck them, essentially. His response was, who cares? They're not in America. I'm only concerned with Americans. I'm a nationalist. I'm a patriot. I care about Americans. Anyone who's not American can go fuck himself. So it wasn't really a debate. It wasn't an ethical debate. It wasn't a debate at all. It was just horror stories. And I think that's very revealing. The fact that Jan Helfeld did not make any moral and intellectual arguments only proves that statism is moral and intellectually bankrupt. Otherwise, he'd argue from first principles like he does when he lambasts the welfare state. When he lambasts the welfare state, he doesn't make horror stories. He doesn't basically say, well, if we get rid of the reason we need to get rid of the welfare state is because of all these bad things will happen. And he contradicted himself. For instance, Jan Helfeld said, it's okay for me to steal if I'm starving. Okay? That's what he basically said. Well, why is he against the welfare state? If you're able to steal from people who have more to give to you to preserve your own life, can't you delegate that right to someone else? Any right you're able to do, you can delegate to another agency. And if he thinks he has the right to delegate defense to the state, well, why can't he delegate the right to steal from people to give him food for his own self-preservation? And what he's interested in not is living a long, happy life. Because if you steal from people, they're not living a long, happy life. If you violate other people's rights, they're not living a long, happy life. Now, in the interview, Jan Helfeld said to me, he asked me, what is the context of the non-aggression principle? When is it okay when is it okay to follow the non-aggression principle, and when is it okay to not follow it? And my response was, it's never okay to not follow it. And he didn't like that answer, so I asked him to sort of expose the lunacy of his view. I said to him, what is the context for when it's okay to rape? Right? And obviously he's not going to like that, because if he says there's no context. Lenin exposes the idiocy of the previous question he asked. And if he says there is a context, Len, he's basically saying there are certain situations where rape is justifiable. He is a moral relativist. He is justifying violating moral principles for his own self-preservation, even if it means exterminating someone else. He said in the interview, there are certain circumstances. It's about an hour and 5 minutes in. You can go back and check it. When I asked him, when is it okay to rape? He didn't say, which is what a principled person would say, there is no context when it's okay to rape. It's wrong to rape. He didn't say that. He said there are certain circumstances when it's okay to rape, like if there's a gun to your head. Okay, so if I go to Jen Helfeld and I say, rape this person or I'll kill you, his response is going to be, okay, I'll rape that person. I'll murder that person. Anything I need to do to survive, I will do. I will murder, I will rape, I will steal. The most important thing in the world is preserving Jan Helfeld's life. And if other people's lives have to be destroyed, it doesn't make a difference. If I have to steal from someone else, my needs are more important than his needs, even though it's his apple, even though it's his life, even though it's his body. The most important thing is preserving my life, and if it has to come at the expense of other people, so be it. And now it's perfectly clear why he justifies the state. Because he's afraid, not based on any evidence. In fact, I said to him, he advocated limited government, and I asked him in the interview, there are 200 countries. Out of the 200, how many of them are limited governments? How many of them are governments that protect people's rights and are not violent, coercive agencies? And you know what his response is? None. None. There are zero. He admitted. There are zero governments which are not aggressive. So if there are zero governments which are not aggressive, this is pretty demonstrable proof that 100% of the governments, according to Jan himself, violate other people's rights. And then he has the gall to say we need government to protect people's rights? What the fuck? That's like saying we need Ted Bundy to make sure other people don't kill one another. We need a rapist to make sure people are safe. It's completely and utterly nonsense. If out of the 200 governments, 100% of them violate people's rights, how can you say a government exists to protect people's rights? And he basically said to me in response, well, anarchy doesn't exist, so if the fact that limited government doesn't exist doesn't make anarchy invalid the same way anarchy is invalid. And he interrupted me and he wouldn't let me answer that point. So let me just answer that point. Failure isn't not trying something and it not succeeding. Failure is trying something, implementing it, and having it fail. There's a big difference between making a cake that tastes like shit and everyone could say you're a bad cook because we tasted the shitty cake you made, versus you never made a cake so no one knows if it would be shitty or not. There's a big difference between something being tried and failing and something never being tried. Limited governments have been tried. The United States government was supposed to be a limited government. There were plenty of governments that in the beginning said, we are going to be limited, and they failed. There are very few societies that said, let's have an anarcho-capitalist society. So there is a big difference between something being implemented and it failing and something not existing just because people don't want to give it a chance to exist, right? Socialism doesn't fail because no one's willing to give it a chance. Socialism fails because people gave it a chance, and after they gave it a chance, it fell. You can't say the same about anarchy. There's no instances where you could point to anarchy and it being a failure. Rather, people are too afraid to try it, so it's not being implemented. And though that is an important distinction, which Jan Helfeld seems to not get. And so, I appreciate being on a show. It's good to get the exposure. I wish he would have let me talk, and I wish he would have stuck to the topic instead of unrealistic scenarios, because there's never a case where the only way your rights get to be protected is by violating someone's rights, right? That's a dog-eat-dog. That's a no-win scenario. And there's that old joke where a guy is walking down the street and there's an attractive girl and he says to her, if you have sex with me, I'll give you $1 million. And she says, okay. And he goes, you know what? I've changed my mind. I'll give you $1. And she goes, what kind of person do you think I am? And he says, what kind of person you are, we've already established. Now we're just talking price. If the only way you could cross a person's lawn, or the only way you can eat in this highly unrealistic scenario is by having to take an apple from someone, are you telling me there is no possible way that he could be persuaded? I'll work for you, unpaid, for a month, for one measly apple. 2 months. There's no way you could persuade the guy to do so? Come on. And if it means that much to the guy that the apple is worth more than anything you could possibly give him, you have no right to steal something which is so incredibly precious to him for your own preservation. Because in the real world, while your life is important to you, it's not more important than his own life. And if the only way you can protect your own life is by violating someone else's, tough. You don't get to do that. And if you do, there are consequences. All right, that's all. Thanks. Love to know your thoughts.